Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. In today's video, Emily had always felt a special pull toward her grandfather's farm. To her, it wasn't just a piece of land tucked away in the rolling countryside of rural Ohio, was a living, breathing part of her soul. Since the earliest days of her childhood, that farm had been her sanctuary, her secret escape from the busy chaos of the outside world. Whenever she visited, she found herself immersed in a place where time seemed to slow, where every sound, every sight, and every smell wove itself into a kind of timeless peace. The cicadas sang their steady chorus through the warm afternoons. The old windmills creaked and groaned with each breath of the wind, as though whispering secrets to the wheat fields. Golden stalks swayed like ocean waves under the sun's steady glow, bending gracefully to the whispers of the breeze. The very air seemed different, here cleaner, richer, and infused with a calm she couldn't find anywhere else now. At 24 years old, Emily's life had become a whirlwind. Graduate school consumed her nights. Her part-time job drained her days. Assignments piled endlessly, deadlines pressed in like walls. And the relentless pressure to prove herself never loosened its grip. Her phone buzzed constantly with reminders, emails, and expectations. The city she lived in, alive with neon lights and endless noise, seemed to tighten around her chest like a vice. But then, there was the farm. Each time she made the long 3-hour drive out of the city, trading the highways for winding country roads, she felt the tension melt away. Mile by mile, her anxiety slipped from her shoulders. By the time she saw the wide-open horizon stretch before her, her thoughts had already softened. Every worry that had seemed crushing only hours before shrank into something small, something distant, something unimportant. She would roll down her windows, letting the warm wind whip through her hair and breathe. And in that breath, she rediscovered herself. Her grandfather Richard was the heart of this place. At 78, he stood like the land itself, enduring, weathered, but unbroken. His hands carried the rough calluses of decades spent gripping wooden handles, planting seeds, and repairing what storms had damaged. His face was a map of deep lines and furrows, etched by years of labor beneath the sun and in the chill of unforgiving winters. And yet his eyes were alive, sharp as ever, sparkling with that mischievous light Emily had adored since she was small. He was the same man who had once lifted her onto his shoulders, pointing up at exploding fireworks on hot July nights. Emily admired him deeply, even when she didn't quite understand him. His lessons were never direct. He taught through parables, through actions, through the quiet way he lived his life. Sometimes it frustrated her, the way he spoke in riddles and stories rather than giving her clear instructions. But even when his words puzzled her, she always felt they carried a truth she would one day come to understand. That Saturday morning, Emily pulled her car into the familiar gravel driveway. The wooden fence bordering the property stood strong despite its age, its boards roughened by time and weather. She stepped out and inhaled deeply. The air carried the scent of damp earth, hay, and wildflowers carried from the meadows beyond. The red barn stood with quiet dignity near the house, its paint faded and peeling, its boards marked by decades of rain and sun. Yet still it stood tall, proud, unwavering, a silent witness to generations. Her grandfather was already there, waiting by the gate. He leaned lightly on his cane, but his posture remained tall, his presence commanding yet gentle. His face broke into a wide smile as he spotted her. "You're here early," he called out, his voice deep and warm, steady as the earth beneath them. Emily hurried across the gravel path, her heart swelling with a familiar affection. "I couldn't wait," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I've missed this place. I've missed you." They began walking slowly toward the barn. Emily noticed how deliberate his steps had become. Age had slowed him, yes, but it hadn't broken him. Every movement carried intention, every step seemed purposeful. There was strength even in his slowness, like the land itself, enduring, patient. Eternal. When they reached the barn, Richard pulled open the heavy wooden doors with practiced ease. The hinges groaned and the faint smell of hay and oil drifted out. "Go on," he said with a grin that instantly transported her back to childhood. "I've got something to show you." Emily stepped inside first, and the barn greeted her like an old friend. The familiar scent wrapped around herd dust, hay, old wood. Iron, sunlight slipped through the gaps in the walls, scattering golden beams that caught the floating dust motes and made them sparkle like drifting stars. Before she could speak, the barn door closed behind her with a heavy thud. The latch slid into place. Emily turned, startled. "Grandpa," she called, her voice tinged with surprise. From outside came his calm, steady voice. "Don't worry, Emily. I'll be right in. I just wanted to make sure we had some quiet time." Moments later, the latch lifted and the door opened again. Richard stepped inside carrying a small lantern. He placed it on a crate and a warm glow spread across the barn, illuminating rows of neatly hung tools gleaming faintly with the polish of care and use. "I locked it," he explained, noticing her raised eyebrow. "Because sometimes, if you want to really learn something, you have to shut out the noise of the world." Emily let out a soft laugh, her shoulders relaxing. "So this is a lesson, then?" Richard chuckled, the sound rough but kind, like gravel tumbling in a bucket. "Always is." For the next few hours, Emily followed her grandfather through the barn. Slowly, patiently, he picked up tools and shared their stories. He held out a worn wooden mallet, its handle polished smooth from decades of calloused hands. "This," he said, his eyes gleaming with memory, "helped me build the chicken coop when your mom was little." "Every tool has a story, Emily, and every story carries a lesson." He moved from saws to hammers, from plow blades to weathered nails. Each piece wasn't just metal or woodite, was history, preserved through use and memory. He spoke of winters when fences collapsed under heavy snow, of summers when drought cracked the soil, of storms that threatened to undo years of work. But through each struggle, the tools and the persistence behind them carried him through. Emily listened with rapt attention. She realized that he wasn't simply showing her tools. He was handing down his legacy pieces of himself. Lessons carved from years of labor and patience dot in the corner of the barn. Something caught Emily's eye, an old wooden trunk. Its brass hinges were dulled with age, the wood scarred with scratches. Curiosity tugged at her. She knelt, lifted the lid, and gasped softly. Inside were photographs, letters, and keepsakes carefully preserved. She drew out a faded photograph of her grandfather as a young man, standing beside her grandmother, the woman Emily had only ever known through stories, since she had passed long before Emily could remember her. "I've never seen this one," Emily whispered. Richard's expression softened, a shadow of tenderness passing over his features. "Your grandmother?" he said quietly, his voice almost reverent. "She was the strongest partner I ever had. She taught me that no matter how hard the storms hit, you hold on to the people you love. That's a lesson you'll need too." A lump rose in Emily's throat. She placed the photograph back in the trunk gently, as though it were a sacred treasure. Suddenly she realized the barn was not just a building. It wasn't just wood and tools. It was a living archive. It held within it the stories of her family, the struggles they endured, and the victories they celebrated. As the afternoon wore on, Emily and Richard sat side by side on a hay bale. Richard spoke of years when the farm had nearly slipped from his hands, of the sacrifices he had made to keep it alive, of the joy he found in watching his children grow within its fields. Emily opened up about her own struggles, her doubts about her future, the suffocating pressure of school, her fear of not being enough. "Emily," her grandfather said firmly, though his voice was warm, "life isn't about knowing every answer. It's about showing up, working hard, and using the tools you've been given. The rest finds its way." The words sank deep into her heart, planting themselves like seeds in fertile soil. She felt their weight, their truth, and something inside her shifted. They rose together and began to tidy the barn. They wiped dust from old tools, swept the wooden floor, laughed when Emily stumbled over a coiled rope. What might have been chores became something more, rituals of connection, threads weaving her into the tapestry of her family's story. By evening, as the sun sank toward the horizon, the barn seemed brighter, fresher, and so did Emily. The day had washed something from her, making space inside her for peace and clarity to grow. They stepped outside, greeted by a sky painted in hues of orange, pink, and soft violet. The air had cooled, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from distant farmhouses. Emily turned to her grandfather, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me your tools, and for showing me what really matters." Richard embraced her gently, his voice quiet but steady. "That's all I've ever wanted, for you to remember where you come from and to carry it forward." Behind them, the barn door stood open. No longer a place of mystery, but a symbol of wisdom shared and love remembered. Emily knew the lessons of that day would stay with her forever. As twilight deepened and the crickets began their nightly chorus, Emily realized something profound. The greatest lessons don't always come from classrooms, degrees, or textbooks. Sometimes they come quietly within barns filled with dust and memory, passed down through steady hands that once built the path you now walk. And in that stillness, surrounded by her grandfather's land, Emily felt the roots of his wisdom take hold inside her, promising to grow for years to come.